Project management is the discipline that helps in organizing and managing the objectives of a project in a controlled manner to produce unique outcomes. In today's market, project management is recognized as one of the most reputed professionals, which offers a very attractive salary. Also, the demand for a skilled project manager is growing throughout the world. So today's session is for people who are planning to start a career in project management and for people who are going to attend any PMP interview. Also watch this video if you want to gain some knowledge about PMP. So in today's session, the interview questions are categorized into three parts. We have easy, intermediate, and then advanced. So let us start a session with the easy interview questions. So the first question is, how will you define a project? Now, as per the Project Management Institute, a project is known as a temporary endeavor with a definite beginning and a definite end. To explain this in simple terms, a project can be defined as a sequence or a series of tasks that should be completed to obtain the end result. A project could range from simple to complex. It could be handled by one team or many teams. But every project will have these listed characteristics. First, it will have a defined life cycle, which is basically a start date and an end date. Next, it will have an iterative task, which leads to a predefined action. The third characteristic is a project always creates a new end product. So this was about project. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is a project charter? Now, a project charter is a document which includes all the details about the project. It mainly includes information about the scope, objectives, and the individuals who are involved in the project. It also includes the roles and responsibilities of each project member. This project charter acts as a contract between the sponsors, key stakeholders, and the project team. So I guess you have some idea about what is a project charter. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what are the techniques that you use to collect project requirements? Now, before we talk about the techniques used to collect project requirement, let us first understand what is project requirement. So project requirement can be defined as what stakeholder expect from a project or from the product of the project. So all these requirements should be collected in a project and also managed properly. Now, some of the important techniques that you can use to collect project requirements are gathering the data, analyzing the data, observing the performance of individual team members, and then organizing or grouping of requirements or ideas, and then prioritizing the requirements and working on them first. And last one is prototyping. So these were some of the techniques that you can use to collect project requirements. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is project management? Now this is a very basic question. You can answer this by saying project management is a discipline that helps in implementing various processes, methods, knowledge, skills, and experience for achieving the objective of a unique project. Now project management is nothing like the usual management. One key factor which differentiate these two are that project management has a final deliverable and a definite timeline, whereas the usual management is an ongoing process. Also, a project manager must always follow the 6P rule of project management, which is proper planning prevents poor project performance. So this was about project management. So now let us move on to our next question. So next question is, explain the project management lifecycle process. This question can be asked right after the previous question. Now, the project management lifecycle is a series of various activities that are crucial for accomplishing project objectives or targets. This helps in structuring the efforts and simplifying them into a series of logical and manageable steps. The project management lifecycle consists of 4 simple phases. The first phase is initiation. It's the first and the most vital step in the lifecycle of a project, where the initial scope of the project gets defined and the resources are committed. This process group ensures the success of your project. The next phase is planning. In this process group, an appropriate level of detail is noted down for the project to plan time, cost, and the resources needed. It estimates the work needed and to also manage the risk effectively. The next phase is executing. Now, this process group consists of the processes which are used to complete the work defined in the project management plan. It's all about achieving the project's objective. It involves tracking, reviewing, and regulating the performance of the project. Also, if you need to identify a potential problem quickly and take corrective actions. And the final phase is closure. Now, this process group is an important part of project management, which is performed to finalize all the project activities to complete the project. This means finishing all activities across all processes group, disbanding the project team, and signing off the project with the customer using the project closure report. So this was the life cycle of a project management process. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what are the most important skills that a project manager should possess? So these are some of the skills that a project manager should have. So firstly, he or she should have good communication skill. Next, leadership, and then team management, negotiation power, personal organization, and also risk management. So these are some important skills that every project manager should possess. With this said, let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what qualities should a project manager have? Now this question is kind of similar to the previous questions, but these talks about the quality that the project manager should have. So project manager should be good at listening, observing, and learning. They should understand the client's need and what they want. They should also know their team members and their personalities. They should take opportunities to learn some new skills and also help out around the workplace. And finally, they should try to master the tools that their company uses. So these were some of the qualities that every project manager should have. Now moving on to our next question. Our next question is, explain the different types of leadership styles. Now leadership is a quality that every project manager should possess. Every leader has his or her own leadership style to guide the team. The leadership style refers to a leader's characteristics, behavior while directing, motivating, guiding, and managing his team members to bring the best out of them. So in a project, they hold the responsibility to motivate others for better performance, creation, and innovation. There are basically 4 types of leadership styles, and your leadership style should be situational depending on the type of team you're working in and the importance of the task involved in the project. So the 4 types of leadership styles are delegate, supportive, directing, and coaching. With this said, let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, how would you decide what is an ideal project? Now, before you decide on what is your ideal project, you must consider the following questions. These questions will help you narrowing down your choices while making sure that your productivity maximizes. So the first question is, what type of work do you enjoy the most? Next, ask yourself how much you want to and are allowed to show your creativity. After that, the next question is, under what type of deadlines do you work the best? Next, how comfortable are you with trying out new things on a project? Next, do you prefer to always receive full credit for your work? And if you are okay with working as a part of a team or you prefer to work alone? Now, based on this question, then you can decide what is your ideal project. So now moving on to our next question. Our next question is, when will you consider that your project is off track and what will be your steps to ensure that it finishes within the given timeline? So firstly, to detect whether your project is on track or falling behind the agreed timeline, you must check the following pointers. First, if the budget is under control or no. Next, you need to check if the project scope keeps on changing. And next, you should check if the original goals are still present or not. And if the answer for all these pointers are true, then the project is definitely off the track and you must take immediate action to bring it back on track. Few steps that you might take are, you can discover the root cause, you can put in more time and effort to catch up, then you can try to follow the original goal or vision. Next, you can readjust the resource management according to the project requirement. And finally, you can keep open communication with the clients and the stakeholders. So these were some of the steps that will ensure you that you finish the work within the given timeline. So let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is the difference between risk and issues? Well, one of the most prominent differences, issues are more of present focused, whereas risks are more of future focused. Next, issues always tend to be negative in nature, and risk could be either positive or negative. The next difference is, issues are generally documented in issue register, whereas risks are generally documented in risk register. The last difference is, the response to an issue will be issue workaround, whereas the response to risk is based on risk response planning. So these were some of the difference between risk and issues. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, why does a project manager need to be proactive? Now, a project manager has a higher chance of finding out the risk and implementing solutions in order to minimize them. Being proactive lets them have more control over the project's tasks and resources. They can keep a better track of all the tasks and issues to work towards implementing small changes and improvements for higher productivity and efficiencies. They can organize frequent meetings for developers to talk about their problems, brainstorm solutions, share best practices, and so on. A project manager also has to compare the actual cost and the time spent on tasks on a weekly basis with a planned number. So these were some of the reasons that why a project manager needs to be proactive. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what are the different communication styles used in the project? Now, the type of communication you use in a project will completely depend on the type of project you're working on and the type of team you have. But the types of communication styles that a project manager uses are return, electronic, face-to-face, and responsive. These are some of the different communication styles used in the project. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what do you understand by time and material contract? Now, this is a type of contract that is a hybrid contractual agreement containing aspects of both cost reimbursement and fixed price contract. Time and material contract resembles the cost reimbursable type arrangement where they have no definite end. This contract is generally used in projects whose accurate project size cannot be estimated or when it is expected that the project requirements would most likely change. So this was about the time and material contract. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what will you do if any of the customer are not happy with the quality or the result of the project by the end of the project? Now you can answer this question by saying, to handle an unhappy customer, you must show the customers that you value them. Next, you need to understand why they are not happy and figure out what modification they need. You should also try to incorporate the modification as soon as possible. And if this does not work, then try to convince and explain the customers that the project fits in with the agreed scope. So these were some of the steps that you can take to handle any unhappy customer. So now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what are the steps that you will take to do risk planning? So there are 5 important steps in risk planning. The first one is, now these steps include identifying and describing all the possible risks that might affect your project and its result. So to avoid this, make a note of all the possible risks. And during this step, you can start to prepare a project risk registry, which is a register to keep all the details of all the possible risks. The next step is to analyze the risk. Once risks are identified, the next step you should take is to analyze the likelihood and consequences of each risk. Now this is a very important step because you will understand the nature of the risk and its effects on the project goals and objectives. You should also input all this information to your project risk registry. The next step is to prioritize your risk. Now after analyzing all the possible risks, it is time for you to evaluate and prioritize the risk by determining the risk magnitude. Now the risk magnitude can be calculated as a combination of likelihood and consequences. So on top will be the risk which has the most chances of occurring and whose consequences are bad for the project and vice versa. You should also add this risk ranking to your project risk registry. The fourth step is to treat the risk. During this step, you analyze the highest rank risk and plan strategies to treat or avoid this. You can create risk prevention and reduction strategies and also plan for emergency in this step. You then add this risk treatment measure for the highest ranking or the most serious risk to your project risk registry. This step is also referred to as risk response planning. And finally, the fifth step is to monitor and review the risk. Now this is a step where you review your project risk registry and with the help of it, track reviews and monitor the risk. So these were the steps that you will take to do risk planning. Now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, customer or development team? Which one is the most important for a project manager? You can answer this by saying, both the teams are equally important as both of them are customer oriented. The development team works on developing product for the customers, while the customer team works on helping the customers with the products. A project manager should invest equal time with both the team and understand the requirement, solve the problems in order to increase the chance of productivity. Both these teams are interdependent on each other, so a project manager should focus equally on both the teams. So now with this said, let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what methods will you use to deliver the results we're looking for? Now the answer for this question will change for every individual. But before you go to the interview, learn about the company, understand how the company carries out its job, so according to that, answer this question. But some of the points you can use here is, first of all, analyze and plan all the work to be done. Next, clearly understand and communicate the work properly. Following that, you can use the project collaboration tool to increase the productivity of the task. Then you can conduct weekly meetings and take updates, and if there is any problem, you can solve it. Then you can prioritize the higher priority tasks and complete them first. Next, you can come to the low priority task. So these were some of the methods that you can use to deliver the results. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, work from home has become the new normal in the post-COVID world. Now, how well are you prepared to manage a remote team? You can answer this question by saying, you're very well prepared to manage a remote team. Then you can talk about a few points on how will you manage a remote team. Some of the pointers that will help you answer this question is, you can have a well-organized workspace, you can have clear communication with your team members, you can conduct weekly meetings to discuss project updates and address any problems regarding the project. Then you can prioritize the important tasks first and work on them. Next, you can use project collaboration tools to improve the productivity of the task and also the teams. So these were the easy questions. Now let us move on to our intermediate questions and answers. The first question here is, what is stakeholder analysis and power interest grid used for? Firstly, stakeholder analysis is a technique used for identifying, analyzing, and prioritizing potential stakeholders who might be associated with the project in some way or another. It can also be defined as a process that should take place before the project begins, where you identify or analyze the stakeholders and group them according to various factors like interest in the projects, their contribution to the project, and their influence to the project. This helps in determining how to prioritize and communicate with different stakeholders. So this was stakeholder analysis. Now a power interest grid is used to classify the stakeholders according to the power over the projects and their interest on their results. And based on these two criteria, you can allocate a position for them in each of the power interest grid. So for stakeholders in the higher power and the higher interest grid, they should be managed very closely. And for stakeholders in the high power, low interest quadrant, you should put efforts to keep them satisfied, but as they have low interest, you should not always disturb or bother them. Next, for stakeholders in the low power, high interest quadrant, we should keep them informed about all the project updates. And for stakeholders in the low power, low interest quadrants, they should just be given the least priority. You can just put minimum effort to them and just monitor them in case their position on the grid changes to something more significant. So this was about stakeholder analysis and power interest grid. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is how to prioritize tasks in a project. Now prioritizing tasks in a project is very important. It helps in ensuring successfully and timely completion of a project. Now in order to prioritize the task, you should follow the below pointers. The first one is you should list the task and responsibility. Next, you need to distinguish between urgent and important. Next, you need to access the values of each task, and according to them, order the task by estimated efforts. You should also stay flexible and you should be ready to adapt and also know when to say no. So these are some of the steps that will help you prioritize your task in a project. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is what is a WBS and how does it help in preparing a good plan? Now WBS stands for work breakdown structure, which is very important in preparing a good plan. Now as the name suggests, WBS is breaking up a project work into smaller and manageable parts which are known as work packages. WBS helps in preparing a good plan as it is integrated with cost, scope, and schedule baselines which ensures that the project plans are going as planned. So instead of planning for the entire project, it will be easier and more efficient to break down the project into parts and then plan for those individual parts. So it will be easier to plan, and even when there is a problem, it is easier to identify and solve the problem. A good WBS plan helps to achieve optimal results and leads to the development of a robust and accurate plan. So this was about WBS. Let us move on to our next question, which is how to handle a difficult stakeholder involved in a project. Since stakeholders hold a high authority and are an integral part of a project, having the consent is very important. But sometimes they can be a little difficult to handle. In such cases, you should accept the authority without fighting. You should remove all the negative emotion and understand the issues. You should ask for advice and listen to them. You should be tactful and honest with your decision and praise them and try to establish the connection. And finally, you should improve your communication with them. So these were some of the steps you can take to handle difficult stakeholders who are involved in your project. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what are the tools mostly used for improving the process activities? So some of the majorly used tools in the industry are comparing and baselining a process. Next, flow charting, followed by value stream mapping, and then we have cause and effect analysis, and last we have hypothesis testing. So these were some of the tools which are commonly used for improving the process activity. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, how will you manage the team members who are not working to their full potential? To bring the best out of your team members, you must try to avoid any type of emotional confrontation with the team and stakeholders. You should encourage them to think and act on their own ways. You should help your team members in developing their decision-making abilities. Next, you should develop the performance tolerance threshold. Following that, you should strengthen the potential of the weak employees by surrounding them with stronger employees. Next, you should understand what motivates your employees and show your employees where they fit in the company's mission and visions. And then you should arrange a proper follow-up process and reward and appreciate their improvement to encourage them more. And finally, you should be ready to let them go if there is no scope for improvement. So with this said, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, being a project manager, how will you game your team agreements for results? Now, trust and agreement is a key factor that facilitates proper communication and coordination in a team, which brings out the best outcome. So to gain agreement for your team members, you must keep an expectation clear from the very beginning. Next, you should build achievable milestones so that they don't feel pressurized. Next, you should collaborate and maintain team trust throughout the project and agree on terms with the team and ask their opinion as well. Next, you should schedule frequent accountable meetings and establish outcome, results, and consequences. And finally, you should clear out any conflicts among team members as soon as it arises. So these were some of the steps as a project manager you can take to gain your team agreements for results. So now let us move on to our next question. What is the formula for calculating the 3-point estimating method? Now there are two ways in which you can calculate the 3-point estimation. The first one is by triangular distribution, where you can calculate E by adding P plus M plus O divided by 3. Now P stands for pessimist, O stands for optimist, and M for most likely. The second formula for calculating the 3-point estimating method is beta or Perth distribution, which is E is equal to pessimist plus 4 times of most likely plus optimus divided by 6. So these were the two ways you can calculate the 3-point estimating method. So now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is the difference between risk impact and risk probability? Now risk probability is the chances that a risk will occur, whereas risk impact is the cost when a risk does occur. So here's a table of risk probability versus risk impact, in which you can see there are 4 categories. The first one is high impact and low probability. Next we have high impact and high probability. And third we have low impact and low probability. And finally we have low impact and high probability. Now as a project manager, you should focus more on high impact and high probability risk and less on low impact and low probability risk. So this was the major difference between risk impact and responsibility, and also tells you about how they are related. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, explain the triple constraint triangle in project management. Now the triple constraint triangle is a combination of 3 key components which acts as the most significant restriction of any project. So the 3 constraints in this models are time, cost, and scope. Now each of these constraints forms the vertices of a triangle with quality as a center factor. So this was about the triple constraint triangle in project management. So now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what are the major types of risks you might encounter in a project? So here's a list of the most frequently encountered risks in the project. First we have cost risks, then schedule risk, performance risk, resource risk, technology risk, market risk, legal risk, strategic risk, governance risk, operational risk, and external risk. So these were some of the major types of risks you might encounter in a project. So now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, you'll be using quality assurance and quality control for ensuring the quality of your final deliverables. Now what is the difference between them? This question can also be asked as, what is the difference between quality control and quality assurance? So while quality control is used to verify the quality of the output, and quality control is done in the end where they check if the end product meets the expected standards, and it is a strategy for detection. Whereas quality assurance is a process of managing the quality. It is done throughout the execution and the development process, and it is a strategy for prevention. So you see, quality control is done at the end and quality assurance is done during the process. So this is the major difference between quality control and quality assurance. So with this said, let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, how does organizational structure influence resource acquisition? Well, an organization structure determines a lot of factors that influence resource acquisition, such as the level of project management, the organization's environment, the communication between the team members, and how the project manager works with the team, and many more factors. Now talking about a few points how organizational structure influence resource acquisition are, the first one is by project management. Now during the process of your project management, your organization structure can either be a tight structure where all the steps that you take are managed very closely, or a loose structure where there are not many rules and a little liberty in performing the task. The next point is communication. Now the communication between the team members to complete a project is greatly impacted by the organization structure. There should be good communication between the team members and also interdepartment communication. It will create a friendly environment where people can share their ideas and suggestions, which in turn helps in the proper flow of the project. The next factor is chain of command impact. Now this means the hierarchy of an organization. The organization structure should be in such a way that when a higher authority communicates a requirement, it should be well understood and followed by the project managers and their subordinate correctly. Also, the project manager should know its subordinates so that they can pick the right people for the particular task. So this was about how organization structure could influence resource acquisition. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, define planned value, actual cost, and earned value. First, talking about planned value. Planned value is a budget which is authorized to an activity or work breakdown structure. This planned value can be allocated in various phases over the lifetime of a project. So to calculate the planned value, use the relationship planned value is equal to BAC into planned percentage of complete. Next, talking about earned value. Now, earned value is a measure of work performed or the budget authorized for that work. In simple words, it's the budget authorized for completion of the work. And to calculate the EV, we should use the relationship earned value is equal to total percentage of the work completed into BAC. And finally, talking about the actual cost. Now, actual cost is a cost which is incurred for the completion of work or the task during the specific time period. In simple words, the cost you incur while you're completing the work in which EV is measured. Now, actual cost can be measured as it is related to planned value, which is budgeted, and earned value, which is measured. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is effort variance? Effort variance in simple terms can be defined as the difference between the planned effort and the actual effort required to undertake the task. And to calculate the effort variance, you can follow this formula. Effort variance is equal to actual effort minus planned effort divided by planned effort into 100. So this was about effort variance. Now let us move on to the next question. What is the critical path method? Critical path method, or CPM, is a resource utilization algorithm which is used for scheduling project activities. So this algorithm is used to create a structure in which the tasks are executed. So to construct a CPM, you should include the following things. First, a list of all the tasks that have to be completed for the project. Next, the dependency between these tasks to understand which task is dependent on which task. And finally, the time estimated to complete these tasks. And based on these criteria, you can prioritize the task which has to be performed on priority. So these were the intermediate interview questions. So now let us move on to the advanced interview questions and answers. So the first question in advanced interview question is, what is the importance of maintaining a requirement traceability matrix? Requirement traceability matrix, or RTM, is a document which ensures that all the requirements that are defined for a particular system are linked to each and every point during the verification process. RTM also ensures that they are tested with respect to various test parameters and protocols. The importance of maintaining requirement traceability matrix is that RTM can be defined as a powerful planning tool which helps in determining various factors like the required number of tests, what are the type of tests required, and whether this test can be automated, done manually, or whether an existing test can be reused. Also, using the RTM, you can get result in the most effective test execution, which provides report of an overall defect status, focusing major on business requirements. So this is why you should maintain a requirement traceability matrix. So now let us move on to the next question. The next question is, what are the processes and process group in the project management framework? A process in the project management framework is defined as a way of doing tasks that are involved in successful completion of the project. These processes define the action to be taken along with the sequences. There are around 49 processes in the project management framework embedded in various processes group. Now, processes group are a collection of processes that are applicable through various stages of a project. There are 5 processes group in which 10 knowledge areas and 49 processes are mapped into. The 5 processes group are initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and then closing. So with this said, let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is RAID in project management? Now, RAID in project management stands for risk, assumption, issues, and dependencies. These are very important items that a project manager must have knowledge about. So risks are the potential problems that can either have a positive or negative impact on the project, resulting in a deviation of the final result from the original plan. Next, actions. Actions are the tasks that you perform throughout the project. And then we have issues. Issues are the hurdles that you might face in the course of the project, which must be successfully resolved or it might cause the project to fail. And finally, decisions are the choices of action or task in the project. Now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what are the things you should track while managing a project? Now, not a single methodology. Now, some of the things you need to track while managing a project are strategic goals and core values of your organization, key business drivers of your project. Next, any constraints in the project or any stakeholders involved in the project. We should also measure the risks that might occur and the level of complexity of the project. And finally, I should track and estimate the size and cost of the project. So now let us move on to the next question. The next question is, explain Ishikawa or fishbone diagram. Now, fishbone diagram is also known as a cause and effect diagram or Ishikawa diagram. It is a visualization tool that is used to categorize the potential causes of a problem in order to identify its root causes. A Japanese quality control expert named Kaoru Ishikawa invented this fishbone diagram in order to help employees to avoid solutions that will merely address the symptoms of a much larger problem. You can see the fishbone diagram over here. What will be the effect of the options? So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, explain the entire team forming process you follow for your team. So there are development stages of a team which consist of forming, storming, performing, and adjourning. So let us talk about the steps one by one. First, we have forming. So in this stage, the entire group unites for the first time with the focus is to build relationship with the team members and to clarify the mission of the project. Next, we have storming. Now in this stage, team members get more comfortable in sharing their opinions with the team, and there is the possibility of internal conflicts within the group. After this, we have performing. And by this stage, the team members learn to trust and accept each other. Each of the team members become competent, autonomous, and is able to handle the decision-making process without anyone's supervision. And finally, we have adjourning. Now this is the final step of the team forming process, which takes place after the project completion. In this stage, the team is broken up and resources are released. So this was the team forming process you should follow for your team. So now let us move on to the next question. Our next question is, what is Pareto principle analysis? Pareto principle analysis is a strategic technique for decision making. It is basically used for the selection of a limited number of tasks which can bring a significant overall effect. This principle follows the Pareto principle, also known as the 50-20 rule, and states that 80% of the results should come from 20% of the actions. Now, this helps in prioritizing the work, especially in large projects with a number of small tasks. So this was about Pareto principle analysis. Now let us move on to our next question, which is how does the RACI matrix helps in resource management? Every individual in a project should understand his and her responsibility. Each team member's role can be defined using a RACI matrix. Now RACI stands for 4 roles which stakeholders may portray in a project. It maps out to is responsible, is accountable, who must be consulted with, and who shall be informed. Just to explain this better, responsible defines who is completing the task, and accountable defines who is making decisions and taking actions on the task, and consulted means who will be communicated with regards to the decision and task, and informed defines who will be updated on decisions and actions taken during the project. With the RACI matrix, there will be no role or task related ambiguity among the team members. So this is how RACI matrix helps in resource management. So with this said, let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what kind of bid documents can be used for procurement management? Now let us first understand what is a bid document. Now bid document is a document that comprises of a proposal which is often made through a bidding process. It can either be done by a person or a company and will include what are the important factors like delivery schedule, the availability of the product, the prices, and so on. So the different types of bid documents that are used for procurement management are request for proposal or RFP. Now RFP is a document which is used by buyers to specify all their purchasing needs and any supporting requirements which will help the sellers understand what are the needs of the buyer. Next we have request for quotation. Now RFQ is a formal document used as a request for price quotation and to specify all the requirements for certain purchases clearly. But the major differences between RFQ and RFP is that RFQ is a relatively smaller document and it only provides the specification of the item to be purchased and the request for a quotation, which is unlike RFP. The next bid document is request for information. Now RFI is used to seek information on various aspects from the future buyer. RFI can contain questions asking about information about the bidder, such as the financial statement for the last 10 years, details of the process of the organization, details of the past accomplishment, and so on. The next bid document is invitation for bid. Now this invitation for bid is a document which is used for inviting potential bidders to come and participate in the bidding process. And next we have request for bid. Now RFB is used to obtain financial bids for specific purchases from a selected group or set of suppliers. And next we have purchase order. A purchase order is an order raised for favoring a supplier for regular purchases. And finally we have contract or agreement. Now contract or agreement can be described as a mutual agreement between the two parties, that is the buyer and the seller. So these were some of the types of bid documents that are used for procurement management. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what is decision support system and how many types of decision support systems are there? DSS or a decision support system is an information application which basically provides the user relevant information which it has collected from a variety of data sources. This DSS can help by providing information which leads to a better decision making. Now a decision support system is made up of 3 different parts. The first one is knowledge base. Now this contains all the information which are basically collected from both internal and external sources. Next we have software system. Now this is composed of model management system. Now a model is basically a simulation of a real world system with the goal of understanding how the system works and how it can be improved. And finally we have user interface. The primary goal of a decision support system's user interface is to make it easier for the user to change the data that is stored on it. So this is about decision support system. Now let us move on to our next question. Name the 10 key knowledge areas as mentioned in the PM book guide. Now all the project management processes in the PM book are divided into 10 areas, which are project integration, project scope management, project time management, project cost management, project quality management, project human resource management, project communication management, project risk management, project procurement management, and project stakeholder management. So these were the 10 key knowledge areas as mentioned in the PM book guide. So now let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, explain the principle of 6 thinking hats. Now the 6 thinking hats is a very interesting way of understanding an issue from a variety of perspectives. You can only think from 6 different perspectives, or you and your team members could do this. Now each of the 6 hats represent a different point of view. Let us talk about them one by one. First is the white hat. Now, a person who has the white hat will only talk about the information. You have to consider it both from within and outside the scope of the discussion. Next, we have the red hat. A person who has the red hat should express his thoughts or feelings. The red hat signifies emotion. You can express emotion and feelings and share likes, dislikes, loves, and hate. The objective here is to address the credibility of an emotion that are a part of certain discussion. Next, we have the black hat. A person who has the black hat is responsible for identifying any mistake or roadblocks. They can be judgmental. Think about everything that could go wrong. Think about the worst case scenarios so others can find a solution for it. And then we have the yellow hat. The yellow hat symbolizes brightness and optimism. A person who wears this hat should think of positive aspects related to a subject as much as possible. They should also encourage the other team members. And fifth, we have the green hat. A person wearing the green hat should come up with new innovative ideas. They should be creative. They should know all the information, problems, and come up with new ideas that will solve the problems and help in better productivity. The main purpose of wearing this hat is to generate as many new ideas as possible. And finally, we have the blue hat. Now, the blue hat is a thinking hat. It is all about thinking. It is the hat which ensures the 6 thinking hat guidance are observed. They decide the agenda and timeline, how long does the session last, when do you need to wear a particular hat and for how long. So basically, the group's controller should wear the blue hat for that session. So this was the principle of 6 thinking hat. With this said, let us move on to our next question. Our next question is, what are the DMAIC and the DMADV methodologies? So firstly, the DMAIC and DMADV are methodologies which are designed so that our business processes will be more effective and efficient. First, talking about DMAIC, it stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve and Control. DMAIC is limited to improving existing processes. It does not address anything regarding the design of new products, services, or processes. D in DMAIC stands for Defining a Problem, which all output has to be improved, customer, and the processes associated with that problem. Next, M stands for Measuring the data to make a baseline for improvement. Next, A stands for Analyzing the data to find the main cause for the defect. And then I stands for Improving the process by trying out different ideas and solutions. And finally, C stands for Controlling process implementation to sustain the improvements. Now, talking about DMADV, it stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Design and Verify. DMADV, unlike DMAIC, is majorly focused on the process of designing new products, services, or processes. D in the DMADV stands for Defining Design Goal. Next, M stands for Measure and Identity of the characteristics that are critical for the quality. And then A stands for Analyzing the data to find the best design. Then D stands for Planning and Designing the product, service, or processes. And finally, V stands for Verifying if the design product works well as planned under real-time and stimulated condition. So this was about DMAIC and DMADV methodology. So now let us move on to a final question. What is the PDCA cycle? PDCA cycle stands for Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. It is a 4-step problem-solving technique which is used to improve business processes. It was originally developed by an American physicist named Walter A. Stewart. It is a cycle, which means it keeps iterating or repeating these 4 steps. The first step is plan. These steps include planning a project in such a way that it defines clearly what the project goals are and what are the best ways to work towards the goal. It is basically setting up framework for all the operation that should be done. The second step is do. These steps include executing the actions which are planned. This do stage can be broken down into parts. The first part includes assigning the task to the individual and training them. The second part includes the actual process of doing the work, and the third part is noting down the progress and insights for future evaluation. Next, the third step is check. This step is used to check if the project objectives are met. It also includes checking if the completed project addresses both successes and failures. So if there are any failures, further changes have to be made. Next, the fourth step is to act. These steps include performing any corrective actions that were needed after the evaluation in the previous step. Now this cycle can be repeated until you get the optimal results. And with this, we have come to the end of this interview question and answers video. I hope it was helpful. Do leave your valuable thoughts in the comment section below. Happy learning!